I've heard that he actually composed a couple of poems way before, Tibet was lost, indicating that his destination was going to be India. So I think, and then either through His Holiness's own foresight about what was going to happen in Tibet, that he made the right move at the right time to be able to come out with all his portable treasures, scriptures, and his entourage way before the Chinese poured into Lhasa. The other story is that His Holiness had a student, a disciple who was part of the government in Lhasa, who gave him the heads up, advised him to leave when he did. So he really basically came on his own. He wasn't assisted by the CIA or any other outside forces. He had to make his journey on his own. But like I mentioned earlier, his connection with the Royal Bhutan family, and then also Sikkim, he had no problem. Came to Bhutan and came right through. And he went to Sikkim and the government of India. I think the political officer, there were a couple of political officers after he got there in 1959-60 that were all giving him 100% support to build Rumtek Monastery. Because as I mentioned to you earlier, the royal family weren't that anxious. In fact, I heard that they advised His Holiness, well, why do you want such a big monastery? But as you know now, when there are hundreds of, or maybe thousands, hundreds of monasteries bigger than Rumtek. The other thing was they said, well, the story was that they said, well, it's too high. It's an equal height to the palace of the Chogyal. But when I got there in 1974, there was no love lost between the royal family and Rumtek. It was really interesting because it was only after the Sikkimese Chogyal, it was a tragedy. What happened to his family. And when he lost his kingdom, then the Sikkimese completely flipped. And then their family, the Yabas, the noble clans and all, wanted to marry their daughters to a Tibetan. And they were like scrambling to find Tibetans to marry, to make connections. But when they had the power, they were all snotty-nosed, and they would be scolded, but they didn't get much good reception. Well, I think Sikkim, mind you, I'm just talking about the royal family as such, okay, but the main big families like the Densapas, the other side Martam families, and several other big prominent families were all Kagyupas. See, so they were not only had power in Sikkim, but they were genuine, disciples of the Karmapa. So they really wanted him to come up, to make the connection. And by then you would understand that India was already at the verge of annexing Sikkim. So not all the prominent families were on the side of the royal family. There were still a lot of families that were on the side of the Indian government, which was automatically against, not maybe directly, but indirectly against the royal family. Well, the land was Teshnam Gyal, then the king of Sikkim. And the king himself was generous. I think there were parties in the family that were generous, but I think there was one name, I just saw her once briefly in a train. She had lost an arm or a hand. Her name was Pukam Lacham. And she was famous for being like really anti-Karmapa and, you know, I don't know whether she was very religious or spiritual, because sometimes when you know, like the nemesis for the Kagyu and Nyingma has been the Gelupas. Well, the Gelupas took power over Tibet. I mean, there's a whole other chapter that we can talk about, but basically it was under they kind of usurped the authority of Namgyel Tsen and Namgyel Tazan, the Dalai Lama's temple and monastery. The Gelupas basically ran the show. So we had a lot of tragedies in Tibetan history where they really oppressed the Kagyupas and Nyingmas. It's a fact. And Kagyus and Nyingmas didn't have much say in the Tibetan government. So I think the royal family, I don't know whether they were that spiritual or whether they were Gelupas, but I know they were of the Lhasa aristocracy. And I know one thing, like, not all Lhasa aristocrats, but a lot of them really didn't like the Kampas. Now, as I said, Karmapa is a great Lama of Tibet, but people around him, and he himself is a Kampa, so there's a combination there, and of course, Karmapa, without any public relations or anything, he draws just thousands of Sikkimese through his spiritual, because of connection. And maybe they felt threatened, that way. But it's a hard question to answer, really. Like as you said, like the Tibetan settlements, I assume that they would embrace the Tibetan refugees, because first of all, the Sikkimese, most of them, their ruling family was all Tibetan. But the rally was on your way up to Gangtok, the capital of Sikkim. There's a place called Derali, and I saw that they said this is a Tibetan refugee center. I mean, it was one of the most poorest centers. This is 74, 75. I cried when I saw that. It was a big kind of a building, hall. They had divided it up with, cloth partitions. And people were, cooking their own food in there. It was very, very sad. Very poor.